billion investment in Anthropic.
Dario needs compute. He signs up with Amazon. Google's already a shareholder in Anthropic.
They're trying to maximize the economic value per token.
Maximizing economic value per token. That is the cleanest framing. Now, the other big drop, OpenAI shipped GPT 5.5. What is your read?
0.5.
It very much feels like a release that's intended to strengthen OpenAI's Codex. Math is cooked, a bunch of other things are cooked as well. Things are moving so quickly now that on a month-by-month basis, we're able to see the hardest of these benchmarks creep up 1% per month, so not long now.
1% gains per month on the hardest benchmarks. Math really is cooked. So what is the actual shape of the frontier race right now?
Or is this truly,
Yeah, I think we're down in the West to a three-way race at the frontier between OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google. And I think those three labs have been pretty good about not benchmaxing, of over-focusing on just one benchmark. They're pretty good generalist models. I think we're seeing an honest-to-goodness arms race or horse race or rat race, depending on which metaphor you prefer. My friends at the Frontier Labs often call it a rat race. And as to the Chinese models, it's interesting. You know, the aphorism, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. To the earlier point about why no European models, where's Mistral in all of this, for example? It's because the US and China are where all the compute is. And ultimately, I think OpenAI's Noam Brown, who of course is quite famous for having led their reasoning approach, he's recently started almost pondering with a bit of ennui whether the weights actually matter as much as they used to, or whether it's really turning into a race for compute. In some sense, as inference time reasoning becomes more and more important, his argument, not mine, but I think it's a credible one, the weights themselves start to become less important in the same sense that, say, individual units within a transformer-style architecture become less important as the transformer itself starts to scale. The overall weights for an entire model may become less important as more and more reasoning gets used, and you see, in effect, a space-time transformer that's rolled out over time in reasoning token space. So if that argument holds, and I think it's a pretty interesting one that I hadn't heard elsewhere before, that would almost suggest that while at the same time we're seeing a race to the bottom on, say, per token intelligence densities between American models and Chinese models, open parens, the American models are still about 6 months ahead, and this has been pretty consistent for the past couple of years, close parens. It may not matter in the end. What may matter in the end, that at least according to the scaling laws we have at the moment, is who has more compute at the end of the day to do more reasoning. So,
and we're going to see that.
If reasoning makes the weights matter less, compute becomes everything. Fascinating call. And what does the average user actually want here?
See, I think the question itself is a red herring. Why? Okay. Because OpenAI bet the company on consumers using all these reasoning tokens, that consumer-oriented strategy for all of these trillions of dollars of CapEx that they're building out would work. And they've had to pivot rather prominently in the past few months back to enterprise. So I think the question of what does the average user care, which I construe as what does the average consumer care, I almost think the market is telling us the average consumer in the short term isn't even part of the equation anymore. This is really, the question should be, what does the average enterprise care? Because they're the ones.
The average consumer is not even part of the equation anymore. Brutal reframe. So where do these Chinese open weight models like Kimi K2.6 actually fit in?
Kimi K2.6.
I think it's helpful for certain enterprise use cases where you want to be able to self-host the model and you don't want to, say, use AWS Bedrock, which, by the way, now hosts GPT 5.5 in addition to the Opus models. I think it's helpful in that respect. It's helpful if you want to be able to self-host fine-tuned models for yourself, ditto with DeepSeek v4. But I think in general, again, it's a few months behind. For other use cases for consumers that want to be able to self-host for whatever reason, privacy or otherwise, probably very helpful. For folks who want to self-host their own clause, very helpful. So I think there are many use cases where these typically Chinese open weight models like Kimi K2.6 and DeepSeek v4 are very helpful. I do think, however, they're not at the frontier. And to me, the big headline is that disparity between the American frontier closed weight and the Chinese frontier open weight seems, at least for the moment, to be in place.
Self-hosting for privacy, fine-tuning, the niche cases. But on the architecture front, what is happening with sparsity?
Which is the term of art I think that we're talking about here, is endemic to all frontier models at this point. It's also the basis for the human brain. If we look at the brain, most neurons don't at any given point in time have action potentials that are going in and out. So sparsity is a great way to reduce the memory footprint of models. To my knowledge, all of the frontier models use sparsity one way or another. It's also a good way to, another term of art, regularize the models. So to make sure that particular weights or parameters in the models aren't overfitting to the training data, one of the age-old techniques is just blasting away individual weights or parameters in the neurons, making them disappear entirely as a so-called regularization technique. So sparsity is everywhere at this point, and it's only going to, I think, become more important with time as we try. One of my holy grails is, as I've mentioned on the pod previously, I'd like to see a million parameter or smaller diamond or black hole of a model at the end of the scaling race. And I think sparsity and cranking the knob on increasing sparsification in these models is one possible path to getting us there.
A million parameter diamond model at the end of the scaling race? The holy grail. Now back to GPT 5.5. What does the benchmark jump actually tell us?
I think it's very important, both intrinsically and also relative to 5.4. So I want to highlight two key stats here. The first is the leap from GPT 5.4 thinking to 5.5 thinking. That's probably the biggest leap overall on Terminal Bench 2.0 specifically. So one way to interpret this, Terminal Bench is a benchmark that's focused on the ability to agentically operate from a command line terminal. Where is that useful? For Codex and for Claude Code type environments. So one way to construe this huge leap, which is larger than most or all of the other leaps that we see in terms of other benchmarks, is that 5.5 is being very seriously focused, benchmarked, if you like, although I really, having used it, don't think it's narrowly overfitting just to creating and making Codex a better Claude Code competitor, but it very much feels like a release that's intended to strengthen OpenAI's Codex. That's thought one. Thought two is, my favorite benchmark among all of these is Frontier Math Tier 4. Frontier Math Tier 4, which I think we even had a New Year's bet about that we're going to have to revisit sometime later this year, is one of the best proxies for the ability for AIs to solve professional level research problems in math. And what do we see? We see from GPT 5.4 Pro to 5.5 Pro, approximately a 2% leap in approximately the last 2 months. What does that tell me? That tells me that we're seeing now approximately 1% gains per month in research level math coming from frontier AIs. And we're getting closer to approximately half of all of the Frontier Math Tier 4 problems getting solved. So you can extrapolate this and realize if the present rate just stays the same, which I guarantee it won't, it's going to accelerate. But even just at the present pace, we're talking about essentially all Frontier Math Tier 4, all professional research grade math problems being solved in the next 4 or 5 years. So math is cooked. I'll say it, second time, math is cooked. A bunch of other things are cooked as well. But things are moving so quickly now that on a month-by-month basis, we're able to see the hardest of these benchmarks creep up 1% per month. So not long now.
Frontier Math Tier 4 cooked in 4 years at current pace. Math is cooked. You said it. How many breakthroughs are even left to AGI?
He has, we need new breakthroughs.
We're out of breakthroughs, apparently. Yeah. I remember 10 plus years ago when I was chatting with Demis, he used to say there were 5 breakthroughs remaining between where we were then and AGI as he construed it. Now we're out of them. It's half a breakthrough or 0 breakthroughs at this point.
Half a breakthrough left, that lands hard. And meanwhile, Google sits on a quarter of all AI compute. What does that buy them?
Yeah, no, it's also just investing in the future. I remember conversations with Larry and Sergey about the nature of the frontier. And I think to their credit, they're investing in the frontier and SpaceX is part of it. And also compute. Epic put out this really, I think, eye-opening stat in the past week that Google now accounts for approximately a quarter of all of the AI compute on the planet. And I'm sure 8th gen TPUs will be part of it. I think it's also worth keeping in mind that the TPUs at this point are being designed by TPUs. I have a number of friends at Google who are responsible for designing next gen TPUs, and they're all just using Google AI to do it. The recursive self-improvement goes all the way down to the silicon at this point.
TPUs designing TPUs, recursive self-improvement all the way down to the silicon. Brilliant. So what is the actual bottleneck right now?
I think they're indistinguishable at this point. I think permitting for on-site energy is a major limiting factor. I think it's probably on balance more of a limiting factor at this point, maybe not a year from now, than TSMC. But it is a limiting factor. Having powered land, having data centers that you can take all of these, infamously Microsoft, even in the past few months, spoke about having lots of GPUs that they'd love to rack mount in a data center, but lacking the powered land and lacking the data centers to plug them in. I think at this moment, energy, at least in the US, but I agree with Dave that in the medium to long term, semiconductor fabrication supply chains, doubly so if there's any geopolitical conflict, are likelier to be a stranglehold once we solve our energy story.
Powered land is the new strategic asset. Microsoft hoarding GPUs they cannot plug in. So why are Anthropic and Google suddenly so cozy?
I would also just parse these as the market doing what the market does. Some of the participants, some of the frontier labs like Anthropic have an insatiable hunger for the compute, and they have the revenue generation to generate the demand and sustain the demand. And so if you're Anthropic, you're going to go to every possible source at scale of compute that you can find, whether it's Amazon or whether it's Google or whether it's other sources. You're just going to go and seek as a hungry customer for compute, whatever the market will provide. I don't think necessarily the story needs to be any more complicated than that. It turns out the world demands a lot of compute to solve some of these really interesting problems in code generation and otherwise. And what we're going to see over time is all of this demand is going to translate into supply. It's going to translate in the short term into what looks superficially like a bit of a circular economy between, call it the top 10 or 12 companies after we see the IPOs of SpaceX and OpenAI and Anthropic. But that's going to diffuse throughout the economy over the next few years, would be my prediction.
Yeah. Top 10 companies forming a circular compute economy, that is the bridge to the future. So when do data centers go fully off planet?
I'll square the circle here and say, I think in the short term for sun synchronous orbit, yeah, that requires FCC and other approvals. In the long term, if we start to, say, launch AI data centers from the moon, that will probably, and we're building them on the moon, that will probably require fewer approvals, at least under the current regulatory regime.
But that's
Lunar data centers needing fewer approvals, perversely brilliant. And on the manufacturing side, when do we get fabs on the moon?
Peter, I'm gobsmacked to hear that you think it's going to be 20 years before we have fabs on the moon. My goodness.
Fabs on the moon manufacturing and pumping into Earth orbit with mass drivers.
Yeah, you think that's 20 years away?
Well, okay, maybe 15, but it's not the next 5 years.
Do I hear 10?
10 years to lunar fabs. The moon is officially in play. Switching gears, what is the through line through every Anthropic move recently?
Oh my goodness, this is lunacy, utter lunacy here.
Well, we are the Moonshots podcast.
Yes. Can we get back just maybe to Project Deal and Anthropic? I think we're missing an important point. Everyone who hand-wrings over the latest Anthropic project purportedly sabotaging or killing some SaaS company, Anthropic doesn't want to be triggering SaaSpocalypses left and right. There's relatively little economic motivation there. I think if you look through the through line, through all of these Anthropic projects or research projects, other than the alignment ones, Anthropic all of their projects can be explained by, and corporate strategies and unhobblings can be explained by a very simple principle. They're trying to maximize the economic value per token. Sure. That's all that they're trying to do.
I love that.
Claude Code, it turns out, through Claude Code, CodeGen, is actually quite economically valuable per token. Turns out per token, it's more valuable to generate useful working code than, say, to generate video or cat images or whatever other consumer plays OpenAI and some other frontier model providers were chasing. They've dropped that now. Everyone's focusing on code gen because on a per token basis, it's so economically valuable. So I would look at projects like Project Deal, running a marketplace, running a business, as Anthropic looking for new ways to increase the per token economic value of their output. It's as simple as that. And running a business.
Maximize economic value per token, the unifying principle. Now, zooming out, the OpenAI versus Anthropic story is starting to feel familiar.
I think it's sort of sad that it's come to this. It's going to make, one remembers the Bill Gates versus Steve Jobs docudramas that were made from critical Apple versus Microsoft era. This has, I think, a similar feel to it. It's sort of sad that I think this ended up in court versus settling earlier on. But I do think I think history will probably view this as sort of an iconic struggle that will get the full Aaron Sorkin, if not similar, like movie treatment. This will be the full Hollywood.
Aaron Sorkin movie energy, brilliant call. And on the actual legal side, what is happening in the OpenAI nonprofit-to-PBC trial?
I'd like to do it more. I mean, I've said, I think on the pod in past, that if the model of changing large nonprofits to public benefit corporations can be scaled, I'd love to do this to a number of major American research universities.
That's not my question. My question is what happens to all the capital invested, literally $122 billion in the last couple of months. There's so much pressure for this court case not to be won by Elon.
Well, I mean, if you're following the detailed TikTok of the way that this trial is being structured, it's being structured in two phases. The first phase is more of deciding whether the claims that Elon et al. Have made are in fact the case, and the second is the equivalent of like a reward type section, deciding what awards, if any, to make as conditioning on the first phase. But I think there are a number of details in this court case that are notable. One is jury selection. There's been public reporting that already selected members of the jury are aware of entanglements that Elon's had with the present administration and may view him negatively as a result. I think that's the fact that jury members are being selected reportedly with some political influence seeping in. I think that's very interesting. I also think it's interesting that the district judge in this case has again reportedly decided that she's going to take the jury outcome as an advisory opinion, but that if there is an award, she's going to decide ultimately from the bench on the final award. So there are a lot of nuances here.
Wow. Dave, any thoughts, opinions here?
Yeah, do we ever figure out if we get to see it live,
no,
play-by-play?
It's not being broadcast, but I'm sure they're going to be sort of court reporters giving us a lot of details here.
You can wait for the full Hollywood treatment in a couple of years.
By the way, there will be a Hollywood treatment of this.
It's guaranteed
with every other major.
Of
course, it may be an AI-generated feature film, but nonetheless.
It will be, for sure.
Jury politically influenced, judge taking it as advisory only. Wild courtroom drama. Now, Microsoft just dropped recall again. What is going on?
Can I first of all point out what a beautiful double entendre from Microsoft's crack product marketing department naming a feature recall and then recalling it?
Nice.
I think what we're seeing here is one big architectural kludge. And I think it's going to be kludgy both from Microsoft's perhaps ill-architected recall as well as OpenAI Chronicle. This wants to be built into the operating system and the hardware. It doesn't want to be an add-on. I don't think, I'll just speak for myself, I don't want an agent taking constant screenshots of my desktop, sending it to a server, and then parsing it, sending back results. This should all be built Apple style. I would hope that Apple will get its act together in the next few months and build this into the window manager and the compositor and the operating system. The operating system is rendering the screen. Why can't the operating system understand what it's rendering?
Recall wants to be in the OS, not bolted on top. That is the right architectural take. So is privacy actually solvable here?
I think we lost.
I'll take a very different position
Please.
here, Peter, on that, which is I think any loss of privacy here is just due to this being an architectural atrocity. This wants to be built into an operating system like Mac OS. It wants to take advantage of the secure enclave. It wants to have secure hardware that's cryptographically guaranteeing that as it captures pixels that come out of the compositor and the window manager and the renderer, that all of those are securely handled and kept local. The reason that this is one big privacy dumpster is because it's not being baked into the hardware
Agreed.
And the local operating system.
Privacy is a baked-in property of the silicon, not a bolt-on. Beautiful. And speaking of Minority Report futures, your take on WorldCoin?
Alex, any thoughts here?
This is Minority Report. This is the sci-fi future that we're catching up with. Apple, with its Face ID, was focused on the face, not on the retina. But if you remember the Tom Cruise, Steven Spielberg Minority Report vision, this is it. I think it's been interesting to watch as World evolved from WorldCoin, and it's been interesting to watch as the company bounced back and forth between more crypto-focused and the economics of it versus the identification of human as a human side of it. But it seems, from a distance, like the human identity verification side is ultimately the bigger seller than the crypto side, and to the extent that's the case, as resident crypto bear, I'm very supportive.
WorldCoin is the Minority Report retina checkpoint. Weird but plausible. So how do we actually solve identity and provenance long term?
Well, I would maybe just comment the IDs themselves should be verifiable with a centralized database. That's how you can maintain a single source of truth. And whether people are flashing IDs or not, maybe
on blockchain,
less of us. With centralized database, not a blockchain. But good one, Peter. Good one.
I'm just poking you, buddy. I'm just poking you.
I also think, there are so many other technologies that we have to bring to bear. We can do hardware level cryptography, for example, chain of custody for video. Yeah. It's not that as a civilization we lack the technologies to ensure that any video or images actually originated from the real world without tampering. It's just that we lack the demand for it right now. And if I would predict that if ever the situation of deep faking gets so bad that it's causing real problems at a societal level, that'll just unlock all of these technological solutions, including hardware level crypto for cameras, cryptography, not cryptocurrencies, that the market will speak for itself and we'll get all those tech.
I'm still waiting for the laws to come out that require all, Grok and every other video generation to really identify it as AI generated. It's not
There's a bill
yet.
I covered in my newsletter, Innermost Loop. There is a bill right now, bipartisan bill, working its way through the House that will cover elements of deepfake fingerprinting like that.
Yeah.
Hardware level cryptography for cameras. Deepfakes will force the issue. Now, ratio question, where is the human to AI labor split heading?
Alex, close us out on this one.
Yeah, I've seen a variety of asset allocations in recent months between humans and AIs. I think tokens to humans is one interesting way of framing that. A pessimist will look at this and say, this is replacement theory. This is humans being replaced by AIs. How awful. An optimist will look at this and say, how incredible, we're empowering fewer people to do more and achieving higher per capita productivity within an organization. What I don't hear very many people asking is, where does this end? So right now, I see asset allocations, humans to AIs, or at least human labor versus AI compute budgets, ranging from 1-to-1, 1-to-2 at some of the frontier labs. It's an even more asymmetric ratio. Question in my mind is there any stationary endpoint? Is there a fixed point as this evolves? I tend to think it's going to trend towards 1 to infinity, effectively, that as we start to phase humans out of the service labor force, we're going to see all tokens and no humans.
It has to. There's no other way around it. The capitalism will demand it. Totally agree.
Until the humans merge with the tokens, at least.
1 to infinity until the humans merge with the tokens. That is the asymptote. And which professions are first in the cooker?
Yeah, I'll chime in and say the professions are cooked.
Yes.
This was a widely expected release. This wasn't a surprise. Those of you watching early releases, leaks out of OpenAI saw this coming months in advance. You can even know from those leaks what the next one to drop is, what the next profession. It's law. There's also one coming for management consulting and financial work. OpenAI, thanks to GDP-val, has, in some sense, mapped out all of the knowledge work verticals and is in a good position, thanks to their own internal and now external benchmarking, to know the relative strengths of their model as appropriately fine-tuned or post-trained for different verticals. So I would expect to see many, many more of these ChatGPT 4X for different verticals. In the case of clinicians, thanks to open evidence and work by Epic in the form of UpToDate and other clinical AIs, this is already a somewhat crowded market that OpenAI is coming into. If I were OpenAI, I would release this sort of product more as a reference design and a way to ensure that capabilities that are built into the underlying models and then post-trained via a variety of evals are broadly available, and that OpenAI maintains its status as a favored foundation model for clinical and biological work. Maybe they'll try to monetize this as best they can. Right now, it's available for free. But I tend to think it's worth more to OpenAI more as a distribution channel for medical knowledge, and one that they can build on. OpenAI has released a variety of statistics over the past year for how many people are self-diagnosing or otherwise trying to treat themselves using ChatGPT. And I think offering a standard regulatory compliant channel for that is a very clever way to then do a sales uppitch to biomedical enterprise and life sciences in general, which is probably where the real
law is next, then management consulting, OpenAI mapping all of GDP-val. Heavy. So is the doctor version really about replacement?
Of course, this is about replacing doctors. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Of course, when fully developed, this and comparable solutions are about automating away medical practice. How could they not be? And also, by the way, nursing, and also, by the way, the HMOs and drug design. OpenAI and other frontier labs are all pursuing drug design and drug delivery. Of course, it's about the full picture of, if you're going to solve medicine, or you're just going to leave millions of human doctors practicing as sort of meat puppets for the AI? No, this is going to be the end-to-end solution. We're just seeing the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Of course it is about replacing doctors, said the quiet part out loud. So how does the medical establishment actually fight this?
Yeah,
I'm not so sure that the immune response, if you look at what happened with the broad transition to electronic medical records like Epic-based systems, for example, every clinician that you speak with will complain about Epic. They'll complain about EMRs, how much EMRs distract from direct interaction with the patient, all of that. And yet every major medical system is either completed or is in the late stages of, at least in this country, their EMR transition. If they can't resist EMRs, how are they going to resist strong AI that outperforms humans?
Wait, hold on. EMRs are kind of an add-on helpful aid because it saves you in documenting the process, etc.
Get rid of paperwork.
The
clinicians hate the EMRs. They hate the interface. They hate the process.
If they could not resist EMRs, they cannot resist superhuman AI. Logic checks out. But what is the doctor's sentiment on the ground?
Go ahead, finish up, Alex. Yeah, go ahead.
This is an interesting micro debate. For the record, my intuition, and I interact with a lot of clinicians, is the exact opposite. The clinicians hate the EMRs, but they love the AI that helps them do a better job of what they want to do. And there may be an extent to which AI interfaces like this end up being framed as the solution to all of their EMR woes. Better
until it takes
dictation. Clinicians hate the EMRs, but love the AI. That flip is huge. On a different bio beat, what about organ donation?
I'm tracking the space broadly. There are other advances as well, like trying to create a national market for organ donation versus a bunch of state markets. That would be greatly enhanced with improvements in vitrification and cryopreservation. I think it's good that there is a vibrant and growing distribution channel for donor hearts. I think that's great, but I also think it's very painful that the need for one human to die, or at least that one human dies and donates a heart to another human, that's such a zero-sum type situation. It's painful to think about, and while it's great on margin to have more efficient ways of distributing donated organs, I really, really would like us to get as soon as possible to a situation where donor organs are completely unnecessary.
Donor organs becoming unnecessary. That is the abundance reflex. And on nanotech, did Drexler's vision actually arrive?
But there's a lot of politicized griping over mRNA vaccines in general, but there's going to be political griping over almost anything at any scale. I think back quarter of a century to Eric Drexler and engines of creation and the National Nanotechnology Initiative, when the U.S. Congress was sold a story that with billions of dollars of congressional and national investment, that we would get medical nanorobots that would swim through our bloodstreams and zap cancer cells. Well, we're getting it, though, but we're not getting it with diamondoid nanorobots. We're getting it with these lipid nanoparticles and Moderna and Pfizer-style mRNA vaccines. I think it's interesting to, almost as a retrospective, to say we actually got the nanorobots. They're just fat. They're not silicon. They're not diamondoid. They're fat.
Yeah, we're using our own machinery to do the battle for us.
That's the other angle. I mean, do you have a prediction, Peter, given that immunotherapies in some sense, like really, really coarsely immunotherapies, we've known about some form of immunotherapy for 100 plus years, and people who were infected with a virus 100 years ago, in some cases, or bacterial infection, showed tumors shrinking. We've known at some level that some form of immunotherapy would work, and we're only now figuring out how to fully weaponize it and operationalize it. Where do you think this goes? Do you think, like, in 10 years, we're all wearing Apple smartwatches that are looking for evidence of tumor DNA or RNA in our bloodstream, and then send our daily mRNA update to a programmable implant?
Lipid nanoparticles is the actual nanorobots Drexler promised. Beautiful retrospective. What is next for cell therapy?
This is both amazing, but can you see the clumsiness of it, requiring blood extraction and then CAR T cell creation in vitro? Why can't we do this in vivo? Why can't we do this in individual cells even? We're seeing the beginnings. This is almost like a horse-and-buggy era of immunotherapies, but surely we should be able to do this in a fully autonomous, like, intracellular environment.
Why isn't it?
Take the win, Alex. Take the win.
CAR T as the horse and buggy era of immunotherapy, intracellular, is next. And what becomes possible when AI models cells fully?
Yeah, solve everything. And also, I would say historically, like before this era, off-target indications were a dirty word, or dirty drugs that had lots of off-target side effects, highly undesirable. But now, if we have amazing AI models of individual cells and the body, suddenly off-target side effects, they become a secret weapon. And we can repurpose drugs. We can combine repurposed drugs. I'm very bullish on this space. I advise. I have a portfolio company, Senjam Therapeutics, that is focused on increasingly on AI for repurposing medications, for anti-inflammatories, for other purposes. I think this space has enormous potential thanks to AI.
Off-target effects as a secret weapon. Drug repurposing on tap. Wild flip. Tangent now. What is your take on AI via human table tennis?
The beginning.
It's totally not. This is a much lower dimensional game than any of those board games.
For sure.
It frankly is astounding to me that it took this long to reach human performance in table tennis, because it's such a simple game. You only have a handful of degrees of freedom in the ball. You have the position, you have its linear momentum, you have its angular momentum. And I think that's about it. The rest is just modeling the trajectory and maybe doing a little bit of Monte Carlo tree search for tactics that your opponent might take. This should have been solved years ago. I don't know why this took so long.
Table tennis solved years too late. Low dimensional game. Speaking of late, where are all the hoverboards we were promised?
It took too long. We were supposed to have these by 2015 in Back to the Future Part 2. Here we are in 2026. Why did it take so long?
We need Mr. Fusion.
You think Mr. Fusion is the reason we didn't get our flying cars on time?
Absolutely. That's what the movie said.
Oh, man.
Well, in our robotics segments here, we had two back-to-back Alex, why did this take so long questions. So let's dig in on that.
I'm very much in it. Why did everything take so long? I guess.
Hello,
right now.
hello,
So
regulatory.
You think it's regulatory, Salim? You think regulations are why we didn't get it?
Why did everything take so long? The question of the era. Now, an audience question, can AI actually solve the creative ideation problem?
I'll take question number 2, which asks, everyone can be an entrepreneur with AI as a tool. However, what action do you take when you genuinely don't have a creative idea for a direction? For most, the answer is none. And this is from 3 billionth random user. I don't agree with the premise. I think, and one of the reasons why one of my funds, O21T Capital, backed a firm started by friend of the pod, Alex Finn, called Henry Intelligent Machines, or HIM, is to solve the problem of creative ideation for starting new ventures. I think just as AI can take over as an operator of a business or a fleet of businesses, AI can also automate the process of creative ideation for those businesses. And I think in that world, in the HIM world, if you will, the role of the human, sort of a one-person owner or magnate overseeing a conglomerate of maybe hundreds or thousands of AI-run micro businesses, the role of that human entrepreneur then becomes one of a tastemaker. You have opinions. Everyone has opinions as a consumer of goods and services, but those opinions can shape the taste over fleets of AIs that are providing the creative ideation for businesses that they bring to you. They say, hey, I want to start this micro business for you. You like it? Yes, no. And then the human can have an opinion. The AI is performing the ideation. The human and the generation part, the human provides sort of the discipline and the taste and the discrimination for which ideas pass the filter, which ones don't. And that's the solution. That's how we square this circle of humans not actually in extremis needing to generate all the
humans as tastemakers, AI as ideators, the post-creator economy, sharp. And how far ahead of Kurzweil's schedule are we really?
Well, let's go with question number 5. Wasn't all of this originally predicted by Ray Kurzweil to be happening sometime around 2040? Are we genuinely that far ahead of schedule? And this is from Brett Avalon. I'm not sure, Brett, what all of this you're referring to may mean, but I do think broadly we're well ahead of where friend of the pod, Ray, thought we'd be. I think we achieved, as I've mentioned on numerous occasions, I think we achieved AGI, which isn't Ray's concept, but was popularized by Nick Bostrom and co-conceived by Ben Goertzel and some others. I think we achieved that by no later than summer of 2020. And Ray's proximate, Ray may say I'm misconstruing his timelines, was predicting his version of AGI by 2029. So call that a 9-year gap. Ray, and I've discussed this with him on the pod, is predicting the Singularity, his version of the Singularity, by 2045. My version of the Singularity isn't a point in time.
It's now.
And it's certainly not in 2045. It's now, and it's an interval, and we're right in the middle of it. So are we genuinely far ahead of Ray's schedule? I think we are. I think Ray would probably at this point, and has arguably said that we are in some ways ahead of his schedule. And I think the benchmarks reflect that. And I think the 2045 timeline that he provided, where the superintelligence would be collectively smarter than all of humanity, I think we're going to hit that so far ahead of 2045.
We'll ask him next.
Singularity is now. An interval, not a point. We are right in the middle of it. And do the survey respondents actually believe their numbers?
Dave, do you think, I'd be curious, Dave, do you think that they believe their own estimates here, or is this a case of revealed preference where they think maybe it's more socially acceptable to estimate a higher number, but actually through their actions, they're revealing a preference that suggests their internal estimate is much lower?
Revealed preference, the eternal economists tell. Last word, where can listeners follow your daily takes?
Oh, thank you, Dave. That's very sweet. For those who want to read the Innermost Loop, just go to alexwg.org, and I provide links to Substack and X and Spotify, et cetera. But I appreciate the promo, Dave. It's very kind.